Hello, and welcome to A Dash of Salt. I'm Dr. Shelley Ann, and I'm so glad you're here. Whether you stumbled upon this podcast by accident or you're here because the subject drew you in, welcome. SALT is an acronym for Society and Learning Today. This podcast was created as an outlet for inviting fresh discussions on sociology and learning theories that impact your world. Each episode includes a wide range of themes that focus on society and everyday learning, whether formal or informal. So let's get stuck in, shall we? Welcome to A Dash of Salt. Today I'm joined by Dr. Courtney Marsh to talk about her work with the Interdisciplinary Consortia, it's also known as IDC, in crime, criminology, and criminal policy, and it focuses on societal impact and her connection with engaged learning in Europe. Dr. Marsh is a postdoctoral researcher at Ghent University in the IDC Consortium Crime, Criminology, and Criminal Policy. It's based at the Institute for International Research on Criminal Policy, Faculty of Law and Criminology at Ghent at the University of Belgium. Ghent University launched thematic interdisciplinary consortia focused on societal impact, the IDC Crime, Criminology, and Criminal Policy being one of them. Based in the Faculty of Law and Criminology, the IDC Crime, Criminology, and Criminal Policy deals with the domain of deviance and its policy response, as well as areas of crime and security. The consortium fosters knowledge translation and exchange, strengthening societal value creation, leading to societal impact, and stimulates synergies and cooperation with external academic, policy, and practice partners from different disciplines. Courtney is currently involved as a senior researcher in CAST, which stands for Communities and Students Together. It's an Erasmus Plus 2019 Key Action 2 Strategic Partnership for Higher Education. Prior to this, she was a lecturer in criminology at Trinity College, Dublin. And before that, she completed her PhD researching police organizational culture of the Irish police in the School of Social Work and Social Policy at Trinity College, Dublin. So I'm delighted to have you as a guest on A Dash of Salt today, Courtney.
Yes, thank you for having me and bearing through my very long introduction bio.
It's great. I think we've covered all facets there, which is great because that means we can get into the meat of our conversation together and we don't have to kind of rehash any of that. So, Courtney, you have obviously a varied and interesting academic history, and there are really a lot of different topics under your area of expertise that I'd love to discuss from a sociological and societal perspective. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe some of your history and your area of research and expertise, and why this area interests you?
Right. So I think the big variation in all of this comes down to a lot that I'm a postdoc and I take what I can get. So I'm getting this expertise under my belt in a lot of ways because it's just what happens to come my way. But it's been quite interesting so far. To start, I guess, going back to my bachelor's, I did not start in criminology or sociology or anything of the sort. I started as a public relations and journalism major. It's kind of what I sorted myself into from high school. And then I realized I didn't like it so much, but I did like the communications aspect of it. So I guess that kind of comes into my teaching and such. I switched into criminology at the University of Florida, which is where I did my bachelor's. Kind of by luck when I studied abroad in England. And then I decided to continue with that to change my last year of my undergrad. I guess I didn't really look back. I stuck with criminology most of the way. I went to Dublin to do my master's. And at the time, I remember thinking, I'm going to do my master's in sociology because it's a bit broader than criminology. And maybe after I'll have some more job opportunities. I realize now a master's degree in sociology is not the magic ticket to job opportunities after grad school. But I went with it and I kind of, even in sociology, got back into criminology. And I decided I kind of like this. So I'm going to keep going with it. And that's when I got into my PhD, looking at police organizational culture in Ireland. And now I have transplanted over to Belgium, so working steadily through the European countries to get some more knowledge. I do criminology. I'm also kind of interested in engaged learning. That's my current research project. We found a way to kind of commingle them. So thankfully for me, I've been able to put two things I'm interested in together, which I suppose is kind of the academic dream, if you can. But that's where I'm at now.
So I guess what I'm interested in hearing, based on what you were just saying, is how the connection between what you did as far as your PhD, and you said you found a way to sort of do both things with where you are now at University of Ghent. So can you tell me a little bit more about the IDC, and what are some of the topics that are researched as part of this?
Right. Yeah. So at Ghent University, I was fortunate enough to get a position in the Faculty of Law and Criminology. So overall, that's kind of the research area. But we had a project come in for the Erasmus Plus cast that was on engaged learning. So not necessarily connected by the project's way, but we connected them through our faculty and our department. Within the IDC, though, we look at a lot of different topics. So both at kind of a local level, so sometimes just in Ghent here in Belgium, also at a Belgian level, there's an EU level, and then we go a bit wider as well to an international level. But we look at things like vulnerable groups in detention, policing, which is my area, and police mobility. We look at some kind of areas in the drug world, youth crime and youth crime prevention. And then we have some other things that cross borders a bit more, so a bit more internationalized, with things like cybercrime, terrorism, organized crime, big data. And then we get a bit more into police agency responses and policy responses and laws to these global phenomena in some cases. It's only kind of a small section of what we study, because the consortia is quite large. We have various different researchers, which is fantastic to have all these minds working together in these different topics. But those are just kind of a fair few of what we get into.
What would you say are the strategic goals? What is the IDC? What are they trying to get out of this consortia, and how does this impact communities and societies as a whole?
So to kind of go back quickly, I guess, the IDC, so IDC Crime, Criminology, and Criminal Policy, it was created about 10 years ago. It started as a pilot, so it was never, they didn't go into it as a permanent thing. So it was kind of a test run, the pilot initiative. And then after, they realized the resourcefulness of it and usefulness of it. So it was funded as a permanent research structure within the faculty and within Ghent University as well. This particular one, so the IDC Crime, Criminology, and Criminal Policy, is based in the Faculty of Law and Criminology. And it focuses, as I said before, on a lot of different criminological topics and policy responses there. But there are other ones as well. So we work together with the other consortiums in Ghent University. The idea, kind of the overall goal of this, was interdisciplinary cooperation and collaboration, I suppose. So it's involved in co-creation initiatives with local partners and projects that link the social sciences and humanities, or AHSS as it is in Ireland, and then also with STEM subjects as well, so science, technology, engineering, and maths. So we look at things like that, as well as other kind of more meta topics like engaged learning or societal impact measurement. So start kind of there. And then in terms of the strategic goals, as I said, it was a pilot project to start, and then it flourished into what it is now, about 10 years later. The idea is to kind of foster this knowledge translation and exchange that leads to societal impact, and stimulates partnerships and cooperation with both the academics within our consortium, the other consortiums within the university, but then also external academics policy and practice partners from different disciplines. So there's a large emphasis on interdisciplinarity, but then we also want to have a focus on transdisciplinarity. And this will come through a bit more with the engaged learning bit, but we not only want to work with other academics in different disciplines, but we also want people from outside of academia. So the IDC is connecting researchers and the research that they do with people from communities, the public sectors, industry and civil society, to make kind of that real world connection and have that societal impact. So we're looking at a few different things there. One example, very, I suppose, timely and topical that has come out of the consortium recently is research looking at the pandemic and COVID-19 responses, in particular relation to verbal partner violence. So we're looking at kind of touchy topics like that, which is criminology, I suppose, in a nutshell. But determinants of what's causing it, what's making it happen specifically during the pandemic. So we're looking at these kind of social problems, if you can call them that, as probably a light word for it, during something that is quite timely, like the COVID pandemic, but also makes an impact for not just researchers in the field, but those that experience it or are knowledgeable with it or touch it in some way in their lives.
That's really actually fascinating. And, I want to talk to you a little bit more about sort of the impacts of COVID and sort of what you've seen come out of that and what you're planning on doing with that. But one of the things that you also touched on was that idea of the interdisciplinary aspects of the IDC. And what would you say would be like the pinnacle of importance for the collaboration of the IDC? And who does that affect actually? Who's involved in this collaborative process and what comes out of it?
The consortium brings together researchers from the faculties of law and criminology, naturally, as that's what we're talking about. But then also we have faculties of psychology and educational sciences, political and social sciences, and medicine and health sciences. And they all come together to work on topics like security, crime, deviance, and these are from perspectives of local, national, European, and international perspectives. So the idea is that is kind of a bottom-up grassroots approach to it. We had the existing researchers in our faculty, as well as the other faculties that were already collaborating together. But the IDC brings it together in kind of a more structured way, and it makes it research more adaptive to the infrastructure that we have going on here. And the IDC then helps facilitate and even stimulate new collaboration and then deepen what's already there. So we're seeing the IDC, it's kind of a formal structure now, but it came out of something quite organic that was already happening. And in particular, we're seeing a lot of cross-disciplinary work that, as you work in academia, we don't always see that, particularly across the AHSS and STEM fields. You don't always see that collaboration there. So seeing something like that now come out of the IDC has been fantastic. And I think it really makes such an impact when you're doing community research, because so often community or even social research isn't based in just one thing. That's to try and say that society and social interactions are just one thing, and they're absolutely not. So we need that interdisciplinarity to make it make sense. So we see that, but then there's also the transdisciplinarity, where we want to involve the community and we want their input as well as what impact we can have on them. So seeing it all come together in a formal way has really been quite incredible for me to come into as a young researcher at Ghent University.
Yeah. So that actually brings me to wanting to ask you some questions about your current research project that you're on. It's obviously, as we've already said here previously, it's on engaged learning in Europe. And we know that that's really a hot topic nationally. and internationally in higher education. It's definitely something that you're starting to see the ripple effects that are happening from one country to another, and then all this sudden this collaborative processes and networking is beginning to happen internationally, where everybody comes together from that European mindset in how engaged learning looks and how it works. And you and I both know that there's many different names that have to do with engaged research or community-based learning or global citizenship learning or these types of things. I'm really curious how you ended up as a postdoctoral researcher in Ghent working on CAST, seeing as you came from Ireland. How did you end up as a postdoctoral researcher in Ghent working on CAST?
Right. So people ask me this quite a lot. And usually I say luck. But I remember sometimes someone told me that luck is something like strategic planning with good timing. Mm-hmm. So it was the American Society of Criminology conference in 2019. And I was getting ready to finish up my PhD. And I knew that I would need a job after. And I was at this conference, and I kind of had an idea in my head that maybe I was debating between the Netherlands or Belgium of where I wanted to go after. I really liked the kind of culture at universities here and in the Netherlands. And so I was at the big poster presentations. There was hundreds in this room. It's a massive conference. And I was just kind of going up and down the aisles, very literally just walking by them, looking at the posters and which universities they came from. And I was kind of stopping at any university that was in the Netherlands or in Belgium. And I came by the Ghent University poster, and I started talking to my now supervisor, Dr. Noel Klima. And he was telling him, I'm going to be looking for a job soon. And in Belgium, I was kind of debating between this university and another one, which I won't name them. But he was like, oh, you should definitely, consider Ghent. It's a great university. And we kept in touch, and he had this project that they were starting soon on engaged learning. And he said, I know you studied policing, so I'm not sure if this is even something you'd be interested in. But kind of when he told me engaged learning, I was new to the field, and it was I think a lot of people are in this situation where they go, engaged learning, that sounds really cool. What is it? And so I started looking into it, and I was like, actually, this is really interesting, and it's something I wish I had an opportunity to take advantage of when I was an undergrad or even in my postgrad work. So yeah, I guess to really come back to it, it was just kind of good timing that it all worked together. And I had started teaching, I was lecturing at Trinity College, and I loved it. When I started doing research, I did it because I really enjoyed the research, but then I found that I also really, really enjoyed the education aspect of it, and being able to teach and share my interest with other students who some of them couldn't care less, but some of them also found it really interesting. So I got into this education aspect of it, and then coming on engaged learning, I was thinking this is something, I suppose I was a bit selfish in the beginning, thinking it could help me a lot in future and help me be a better educator. So I got into it, and the more I researched it, the more I realized, it's such it's becoming a hot topic now, but it really hasn't been so much in the past. Right. And I started to realize the importance of it, and it made me want to go forward with it. So in a nutshell, that is how I moved from Ireland to Belgium.
I love that story that you're kind of an accidental teacher, that you definitely had the initiative to want to be a researcher and to be involved in all things research, but then you found a bit of a passion for teaching accidentally through that, which is really interesting because as we know, when many people go through the research process and doing a PhD, some people actually find teaching and lecturing a bit of a drudgery for them, and they don't want that to be a part of their research experience. So when it's something that you stumble upon and you find you have a passion for it and you're really interested in it, that's actually a really exciting and new variant that you can use as part of your skill set, which is fantastic. Another thing that you touched on that I thought was really interesting was that you said that your current supervisor, was the one that was standing over that poster. And that actually surprises me a little bit, again, from, experiences in the world of academics. You don't often find an established academic or an experienced academic standing over a poster or presenting a poster at an academic conference. To me, it does make me feel like that story that you just told was a bit serendipitous, that, there was a moment, you were there, right person, right time, and being able to, move on with this now current experience that you're in. So.
Yeah, no, it was a good experience. And it's I think such a telling difference between Belgium and Ireland. That I think the more experienced academics here are a bit more hands-on. So yeah, I don't think you would ever see that in Ireland, or even really in like the US from those universities. The experienced academics are there to kind of maybe look over their grad students, or they might pop into a presentation, if that. I definitely know of some who only go to conferences now based on the location, and they want a good holiday. So it's definitely been quite different, but it's a good different, and it's been a nice reception into it.
Yeah. I'm so excited for the experiences that you've had, and for the listeners, obviously you and I have a previous established relationship and a friendship. So for me to kind of see this journey and this path that you've been on yourself has been really exciting. Just to see the experiences and the opportunities that you've been given, and like I said earlier, how serendipitous and perfect timing it is.
Who would have thought, when we met 5 or 6 years ago, that I would end up doing something with education when that was your whole thing?
Exactly.
I was the policing one, and education was your thing. So yeah, it's kind of come full circle a bit.
And I remember us having conversations, and the only connecting element that we had, the societal aspects and things that we always found tons of things to talk about. But I did find it quite funny when you did tell me that you were part of this engaged learning consortia that looks at society and engaged learning. And I was just like, well, look at that, a small world in academia as well. But so really, okay, that actually leads me to the next question for you, which is actually specifically about engaged learning. If you can tell us a little bit about what engaged learning is in the European context, and why IDC feels that it's an important aspect of their consortia.
Right. So to start, I'll start with your second question first on why we feel like it's an important part of it. Pretty plainly, it's one of our pillars, one of our action pillars. So it was built into the consortium that engaged learning is a priority for us. So the connection is not so hard to find in that way. But for us, particularly within CAST, we've taken, because there's so many different types of engaged learning, as you said earlier. You can go in a lot of different directions with it. We took kind of, I suppose, a more narrow approach. We include a lot more in our research, but the most important part for us was, and I to say I had no part in the naming of this project, but I think it's brilliant, CAST, so communities and students together. The idea is that there needs to be a benefit to the student. So we see that with their involvement in the community and in society, but that you could kind of so well do by an internship. So originally, when I was first thinking of engaged learning, that's what I saw. But for us, it needs to go a bit further. So not only does the student need to benefit and get this kind of real world experience in some way, but also the community needs to interact, not just benefit from the services being rendered. So the idea is that, yes, they will benefit in a real world solution, problem solving type of way, but they also need to be involved in the process. So it's not just a matter of the students going out and saying, here is this, thing we've done or made or created or what have you. But it's going into whoever the community consists of at the time, and talking to them and collaborating with them and seeing what it is that can actually benefit them and what comes out of that. And then the students going back with, obviously with a relationship to the university, and working on this problem. And then there's a lot of back and forth between the students and the community to come up with an actually beneficial, I suppose product is probably not the right word, but it's the best term I can think of in the end. So it's that kind of collaboration between communities and students, but in a mutual way. So mutual partnership is what we say quite often within the CAST remit. So it's a bit unique in that way, rather than just community service learning or an internship. The communities need to be equally involved in it.
Yeah, one of the things that you said was that strikes me is that idea of putting the university sort of at the heart of the community, but at the same token, you can switch it around and say that the community is the heart of the university. And sometimes in the past, there has been, here's the university, this is what happens behind the walls or the gates of the university. Here they are, yep, they're plopped in the middle of this community, but then this is the community. You know, what this engaged learning idea is bringing the two together. And I liked what you said about, you know, that it's an interaction between the community and the benefits that they're receiving as community interacts, rather than just acts as consumers from benefiting from the students' group projects or things that they're bringing into the community. It's that whole idea of interaction, which is actually the epitome of, what did you say CAST stands for again?
Communities and students together.
I love these types of acronyms that really speak to exactly what engaged learning is. Has the pandemic presented any challenges for engaged learning and for this project that you've been working on?
Absolutely. We see it a lot. So the whole idea of communities and students together is obviously limited when we're in the middle of a pandemic and aren't meant to be together. I know in Belgium, at least, I think they've just lifted the restrictions a bit so that up to 10 people can meet together outside. But previously it was, I think, only 2, maybe, or 4 possibly. So the whole together part of it was quite limited. Obviously, there are adaptations to it online, but in some cases, the communities that we're meant to be in mutual partnership with don't have access to internet or computers or things like that, or at least not stable access. So it's made it quite difficult. I know in the book that we just published, Engaged Learning in Europe, most of the countries have a section on how they've had to cope with COVID in the last year. Because a lot of this evaluation was happening just during the beginning of COVID, when people were first having to adapt to it. And one in particular, it was our Italian case example with the University of Parma. Their Engaged Learning Initiative was placing university students into local schools in Parma. And these would have been like Erasmus students. So they would be from countries where their native language was not Italian, and they were put into the schools and they taught a subject, whatever their subject happened to be, but in their native language. So they would be teaching maybe science in German, or history in Russian, or something like that. So to have to adapt to something like that, where the whole idea is that there's this collaboration in the classroom. Before, I think there's a bit more of a structure to it now, but in the very beginning, you know, people didn't know what to do. Schools just kind of closed before they copped on to the online learning thing. So we've seen a lot of impacts in that way. But we're seeing also a lot of rapid adaptations to it that have been quite successful. So one of our partners as well, at the University of Exeter in the UK, had quite a successful run of their annual, they call it Grand Challenges, and they adapted online last year. So they saw a good turnover of that to an online platform. But ideally, I think this is happening a lot with universities. We're adapting as best as we can, but everybody is just kind of waiting until we can get back to as close to normal as we were before. And I think even though we're able to adapt to COVID and moving to online platforms, it just isn't the same. And I know one of the reflections in the book was on kind of what worked and what didn't, particularly with COVID and online platforms. And one of the reflections that came out from the UK was that when you're in an online platform, you miss that opportunity for kind of organic conversations and things like that. And I find anyway, so often some of the best ideas come out of these kind of offhanded side conversations, and some of your most brilliant ideas come out of something that it isn't really, it wasn't meant to come out of that, but it just happened upon you. And you really miss that interaction online, because if you have a break, you shut your computer, you log off, and you go do what you're doing. Whereas before, you might have gone to grab a coffee with someone and you started chatting about, who knows what, and something could come out of that. So we're missing that connection there with the online. But I suppose we're doing the best that we can.
So I want to talk a little bit more about the project and some of the countries that were involved in this particular project, and then I want to talk a little bit more about the publication. As you know, I read your publication, I reviewed your publication, and yes. And firstly, I think that it's really written in a reader-friendly way. Each of the elements having those ideas about lessons learned and what worked and what didn't work, and how each of the partners who wrote bits and pieces on what their project was and that type of thing. It really just comes together really, really nicely. And again, we'll talk about it a little bit more in a minute, but what I'd like to know is for you to tell us a little bit about the various countries that were involved, because this was a multiple country project, and what were some of the key pieces that struck you as part of this project with the countries?
Right. So I've got my book open here just to make sure I get all of the university names correct, with the translations from the native languages. I always mix up kind of University of and then just name of university and then that. So I'll get it correct here. CAST is with Erasmus Plus. There's 6 partner universities. So we have Belgium, naturally, which is Ghent University here in Ghent, Belgium. We have the University of Turku in Finland, Otto van Guericke University Magdeburg in Germany, the University of Parma in Italy, University of Malaga in Spain, and then finally the University of Exeter in the UK. So those are the 6 partner universities. As you said, I'm glad to hear that the book was quite readable, because taking 6 universities where all but one don't speak English as the native language, there's always kind of a bit of a risk there when you're doing it, but I'm glad that it came together well, and hopefully it's useful in years to come. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so we have the 6 universities there, 6 wildly different initiatives that come out of it. Which we had the same structure for each of the chapters, so that there was kind of an overall framework of it. We wanted to keep it loose in order to be able to accommodate all of the different types of initiatives that we had come out of it, which was one of the things that's reflected on in the last chapter. Is the idea that, and we touched on it earlier, that engaged learning, it's 2 words, but it means so many things. And it can be so many things, which to me is one of the greatest strengths of it, the flexibility you get from engaged learning, and that you can have a sociology or a criminology based example, but then you can just as easily have an engineering based example. So the flexibility and just the wide range of what you can do, I find it so fascinating. Even though I've been studying this for a bit now, I still think it's so interesting to see all of the different versions that you can get from engaged learning. And it's one of those things I don't know why I've been thinking about this in the last 2 weeks in particular, but I wished I had this when I was an undergrad. I wish I had an experience like this. Especially in the book, we have a section for interaction with the students who were involved. And you can see really everyone who took part in it really found it to be quite a benefit to them. And it's so different to something that they've done. And I can't help but wonder, like, maybe how different my undergraduate experience could have been if I had experienced something like this and been connected to the community that I lived in this way. And I didn't have that. I blew into my university and I left after. I still love my university and I have a connection to the university, but I don't have a connection to the community in a way that some of the students who have had engaged learning opportunities might. So I don't know, I think that's so interesting. I think about it probably more often than I should, but I do.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting and really important, especially in an international context as well, because again, you had your higher education learning experiences from so many different places, starting in Florida and then going to England, and then going back to Florida and then to Ireland, and then now you're doing your postdoctoral research in Belgium, and and that idea of that what you were missing, that lack of community, by not being able to participate in something that is actually quite easily implemented, or maybe it can be a little bit difficult in conceiving or conceptualizing what the community group, the school and community project might be. But then once it's conceptualized, it's actually quite easy to implement or to re-implement, as you go on. And actually, I'm going to pick on you a little bit and ask you if one of these projects was your favorite, because I want to tell you which one mine was when I read it. But was there one that was kind of a favorite for you? And what was it and why?
Naturally, this is the part where I say the one from Ghent University, obviously. But it's actually not even one in the book. Even though I mentioned the one from Italy earlier about the teaching in schools. And I think, as we talked about earlier, I kind of accidentally found my passion for teaching. And I know one of the reflections in the book, one of the students had said, I never really thought about teaching before, but because I did this, like I'm considering studying teaching now. And it kind of, again, makes you wonder, would I have found this earlier if I'd had an opportunity like that? And I think it would have been interesting. Also, I love teaching and I love talking, as we discussed earlier. I'm a talker. So maybe it could have impacted me in that way. But, geez, it's hard. It's like being asked to pick a favorite child. This is the first book I've published, so it is very dear to me, and having to pick one example, it's difficult. But when you asked me that question, my first thought was not one that's in the book. So with CAST, to go back to the project for a second, we have different outputs of it. So the first output, or rather I'll say the compendium here, which led to the book, was the second output. The first output was a state-of-the-art review, where our partners from Magdeburg in Germany did a state-of-the-art review of kind of the literature in the area. But then each of the partner countries brought up about 5 or 6 different examples of good practice of engaged learning within their country. There's one with KU Leuven, which was great, and it was based on computer science students who worked in collaboration with, I think it was an NGO. And essentially what came out of it is that they worked with these children who had learning disabilities. And they developed and made these computer programs that helped them with their computer skills. And I just think the impact of that after, I think it was amazing to work on something so meaningful and necessary. And they were able to work with the communities and the children and say, does this work for you? And they worked on it until it did work for them. And they had an actual outcome that was just so beneficial. There's another one as well. It's Vrije Universiteit Brussel, so the Free University of Brussels. And it's something that I'm hoping in my years to come here at Ghent, I can get going here because I find it fascinating. It was a prison partnership. So they had, I think it was about 20 students in the class. 10 were students from the universities and 10 were students or from the prisons. So they were prisoners. And they had classes within the prison, and they had this kind of learning both together and from each other between the students and those who are incarcerated. And I find it so fascinating. So those were two of my ones of interest outside of the book, but to go inside of the book. But yeah, so cannabis sativa, process of a plant, obviously the English translation of it. It's one of those things that I reflect on it in the conclusions, and that and this is actually something we're talking about now with my own colleagues, of perhaps bringing this initiative and this performance to other countries and other universities, because it's something that I was thinking about that I just don't know if it would work elsewhere. So obviously Belgium being closely situated to the Netherlands, it's not legal here, but cannabis has a different tolerance policy than, say, in Ireland or in the UK or in the US. So the ability to have this discussion here is I think that it impacted by the policy around it in a wider scope. But yeah, no, I think in terms of an engaged learning initiative, it's quite innovative. I've done a lot of research on engaged learning, and I've not seen one quite like this.
Me either.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see. Mm-hmm. And the way they did it, they were quite clever about it. Those that kind of created the course, which was Herman Wolf and Tom Decorta, which they were so helpful as well in doing the chapter and lending us their data and their expertise and resources. But both research in the area of drug policy and the like. And they recruited in a very well-known Flemish lawyer. So it's not an actor who was on the stage, it's an actual lawyer, which is reflected on in the chapter, but also the students found quite helpful to see kind of like a real lawyer in action type situation. But the premise of this performance piece is that this lawyer is defending his client, and the client as such is the cannabis plant. And so he's defending the cannabis plant and making an argument for why cannabis should be legalized, which I think it's really interesting to see, and it is quite thought-provoking. And in the actual performance, it's not gone ahead this year, in part because of COVID, but there were also some other issues behind the scenes. But in the performance, they had a poll go up, and they asked quite bold questions, I think, where they asked, have you ever used cannabis? And very kind of confronting you with these things right away. And they found, it's not quite as unheard of as you might think, but also looking at university students, you're not quite so surprised either. So they start with that, and then he goes into this performance of defending his client. And the initial run of the performance only included this part of it, but they got feedback from the students, and they, in the last few runs of it, incorporated a counter argument. So they had another, also real lawyer, come in on the offensive in saying why it should not be legalized, to kind of give the students a counter argument and to balance the argument. Mm-hmm. So that after they have kind of a more nuanced experience of this policy and this approach to drug policy. And one of the sections in the chapter is kind of benefits to the students, benefits to the staff who are involved, and benefits to the community. And very typically what we see with benefits to staff, and it's something we reflect on in the end as well, is that there's not a lot of benefits for the staff outright. There's kind of that personal fulfillment, which obviously is fantastic. A lot of the times we see that they're able to publish from these engaged learning initiatives in things like that. But I spoke to Tom Decorta, and one of the benefits for him is that he was able to take his research, so his actual research findings and things that he's found along the course of his different studies, and put them in such a way that it's able to reach the community. So his actual findings were put into the text and the script of this performance, and then relayed to both students but also community members in a way that just, it wouldn't have happened before. As you mentioned earlier, like within the walls of academia, we sit on this kind of, golden throne, or, we have the walled off gates. And a lot of the research that we do, it's published, but it's published in such a way that really the only people that are going to read that are other academics who read academic journals.
Yeah.
Which is great for those who have access to it, but for those that don't, or even sometimes it's written in a way that's just not readable by a normal person. So to have it put in a performance like this, where it's delivered to you in such a way that it's meant to be relatable and it's meant to be understood, it's quite innovative, I think. And I thought it was a really, really interesting approach to such a topical, but also a bit controversial topic.
Yeah, I think that, there's something a really interesting point that you made there, that, it resonates, here, but I would say resonates internationally. And that is that there needs to be more ways and more creative ways to disseminate research widely among the community. And again, maybe things like this engaged learning projects create that mindset from an academic perspective on, okay, we've included the community. Now, we need to disseminate the results of this particular project back out to the community, and maybe get more people thinking about how do you to write and to disseminate in a way that can be read and understood and appreciated by a wider society, rather than just from an academic perspective. And I think that's really a key element of engaged learning, and the importance or the impacts of engaged learning, and fingers crossed, that it will continue in that direction. So we're coming to the end of our conversation, which, like I said, there's so many other aspects I would love to talk to you about, but that might be for another podcast and another time. Yeah. This one was fascinating because, like I said, I have an interest in it, and I know so many other people who are going to be listening have such an interest in that idea of engaged learning, and especially from the international context. But I wanted to ask you, how can the listeners find out more about the work of the IDC and about engaged learning?
Right. So there's a website that we have. So if you can Google IDC Crime, Criminology, and Criminal Policy, Ghent, and it should be one of the first ones that comes up. We have a Twitter that we publish, we tweet and retweet a lot of the research that's being done. So it's at crime_Ghent. So it's all about crime. And then there's a new blog website that's going to be launched soon about more of the research that we're doing. So there's a few different resources there for the IDC. CAST also has a website. I think if you Google CAST Erasmus Plus, it comes up easily enough. And then we have the book as well, which is through our website, or it's connected to Ghent as well. So if you found my research page, it would be on there. So there's a few online resources in that way. Yeah.
And I think I just want to add a little side note there, that you actually suggested one of the other ways that sort of research and results and things like that can be disseminated to a more wider public, and that's through blogs and reflective pages and reflective blogs, and these types of things where people who are interested in something comes across it, and again, it's written in a less academic way, and a more a way that can be presented to a wider host of people that can be interested in that. So I love that, because I feel like that's very much 21st century dissemination, and things that we need to do need to start thinking about is why not use all this technology and the internet, the power of the internet at our disposal to disseminate in a more wide way.
Right. Especially I think I get the comment quite often, and when I do go to publish journal articles, that ones I have published, people are like, oh, I really like it. It's very readable. But I get some comments back sometimes that, like, my language isn't academic enough.
Oh, I know.
And I just think, good Lord, can you fuck off with it? Like, It doesn't need to be super academic. Like it needs to be readable.
Yeah.
I don't understand why there's this, it's such a pretentiousness with old school the academic world that just, I want it to go away.
I know.
And maybe this is me coming in the young, millennial that just wants to bring down the institution, but I very much want to work within it, but I want it to change a bit and become a bit more modern, because some of it is just, it's unnecessary.
Well, and the other thing is there's so much really, really good research and so many, findings that are out there that are powerful if they could get into the hands of the wider society and the wider public. And in like you said, we kind of have to get it. Listen, I'm not the young millennial, and I agree with you 100%. I just think it's good practice, to want, to kind of get out of that old tradition that only academics are smart enough to know or be able to read or understand, what you've written. And I'm talking in a very pretentious manner, I see now too. But I think that again, that is that difference between that old classic and traditional way, and so much information and so much fabulous stuff that's has been collecting on dust on college library shelves for eons and eons now, that really could have been, extremely important, and it made big changes in our society and in our communities if it had been published a little bit further or wider than just the academic.
I see the argument a lot more on Twitter. I've taken a bit of a step back recently, but the idea that came about a lot of the time that it kind of belittles people a bit if they try and read something and they can't understand it. Mm-hmm. And I love that what I'm seeing come out now is that if you can't understand it, it's probably not your fault. It's probably more on the person that wrote it, and that it's kind of, what was it, Einstein that said, if you can't explain it simply, then you don't know it well enough. And I want to see that come into research and academics, because I'm so tired of reading this like overly technical and like it's just unnecessary to have this kind of pretentiousness in writing. There's no reason for it, and I think a lot of times people do it because they're expected to do it, and I know I definitely do it at times, because I'm like, oh, this is what they want to see from a publication. Mm-hmm. But just we need to really rethink about it.
Well, that's the thing is, we've proved our rigor, we've proved our knowledge base and our understanding in our area of expertise by getting our credentials. Okay, it doesn't need to go any further than that. Like we've been able to prove ourselves from there, so we should be able to not be mocked or for like what you said earlier, when people say, oh, you didn't really write that in a very academic voice. You've already proven yourself. You've got the credentials. You've got the PhD. You can now disseminate your research or anything that you're interested in now in a way that reaches a wider audience, and you don't have to prove yourself because you've already proven yourself. And I think that's, again, the mindset that people sort of get wrapped up in, with that whole idea of academic. So I mean, again, this is another fabulous conversation that we could just spend more hours debating and discussing and talking about. And maybe we'll bring a panel on one day and we'll just all have conversations about that. But I am so thankful that you've come on. And again, I think, even what we were just talking about now, there is that important connection there, that idea of community-based learning, engaged learning, where you involve the community and you involve the university. There has to be a way to make sure that everybody feels included. And that idea of, if you're writing in a way that you're now not including the community that's been involved in this project, then you're being exclusionary and not inclusionary. So there's something to be said about the importance and, again, the impact of engaged learning and drawing the community and the university together and making it inclusive for everybody. And that means that the results and the findings should also be the same, be inclusive for everybody. So thank you so much for joining me today. I do look forward to having some conversations from a societal and a sociological perspective in the future. And I wish you all the best in your continued journey at University of Ghent.
Right, thank you so much.
I hope that you've enjoyed this discussion on A Dash of Salt, a space where you'll always find fresh and current discussions on society and learning today, seasoned with just the right touch of experts in education and a dash of sociological imagination. Please be sure to like and share this episode, and don't forget to subscribe to A Dash of Salt on Podbean so that you don't miss the next episode. Thanks so much, and we'll chat again soon.